Today, every day, small cap investors visit Agoracom knowing this is the day to discover the world's next great company, to have their dreams come true. That's why I take to the open road, to find them, to tell their stories, to engage them, to bring them to life, because they want to connect with you from your office, your phone, your home, anywhere. Agoracom, find your dream.
Welcome to Beyond the Press Release, a production of Agoracom in which we take the time to speak with small cap executives about what's going on at their companies. With us today, I'm happy to have him back because only on here about 10 days ago, Bernard Tourion, Chairman, CEO of HPQ Silicon Resources, trades on the TSX Venture Exchange under the stock symbol HPQ. For our friends in the US, URAGF, and for our friends in Europe on Frankfurt under UGE. Now, for those of you who are new to the story, quick but powerful summary. Their HPQ is in the process of becoming a vertically integrated producer of silicon powders, silicon wafers, other related products, primarily for the lithium-ion battery market and other markets, including solar down the road. For those of you who think that that's a bunch of lip service, they've got a proven and advanced process to get it done with world-class partners, two of them, that have helped along the way. PyroGenesis Canada, a global leader in plasma torch technologies, whose technologies are used by the Department of Defense in the US, and Apollon Solar, one of the world's leader in renewable energies. The press release we're here to talk about went out a couple of days ago. I'm going to read it off for you. HPQ and Apollon Solar strengthen collaboration to focus on porous silicon for the lithium-ion battery market. Bernard, welcome back, buddy.
Thank you.
Okay, we just had you on here about 10 days ago, so you haven't even given us room to breathe, and you've already got this press release out. Sounds pretty technical at the end of the day, right? Now, how many people understand what porous silicon wafers are for the lithium-ion battery market? But we're going to get to that as
press release on the subject. So
that's true. Still not too many people know. But hey, that's why we're doing this. All kidding aside, because this is so potentially powerful. So here's the first question I want to ask you. You actually state in the press release that the agreement's main focus is now on, I emphasize now on, manufacturing and value generation. So let's talk about the manufacturing first. Should we read into that you and Apollon are very confident that you'll actually be manufacturing porous silicon in the near future?
Okay, I'll phrase this differently. We know, basically, Apollon knows how to produce porous silicon wafers. That's not an issue. What the key point and why I'm talking about manufacturing and everything else is the plan is to take our capacity with the PUREVAPTM QRR, which is unique, being able to produce 2N to 4N silicon metal, and then use that to make porous silicon wafers, right? That can be used either in the wafer state for solid state lithium-ion batteries, or that can be basically crushed into porous powders that can then have multiple applications. So that's and it's sort of like an additional step. It's very similar to what we were working with Apollon in the solar business. Because in the solar business, we're going to take the material out of the PUREVAP, whatever the purity is, then go through a metallurgic process to get it higher up enough to make solar grade silicon metal. Then at the end, we would have poured that material into a crucible, and we would have made wafers out of those that would have been the wafers you put on solar panels. So this is why it's not that far away from what we were originally doing. It's just that we discovered a better end market for what we're doing, okay, where what we're doing is much more unique. And when we're working the solar, we would have to go all the way to demonstrating that our solar cells work. In the porous silicon, basically wafers, Apollon's already demonstrated this. They already own the patent to this. So you combine the PUREVAP, that technology, and now just a question of, okay, finding end users and just manufacturing. Okay, I admit that I make it sound easier than it is. There will be some, challenges, but not as massive as if we had to go from scratch from beginning to end. All right. The key point is making porous silicon right now, all the traditional process are based on using electronic grade silicon metal, which is very expensive. And the only company in the world that has a patent to do it with metallurgic grade silicon metal, which fits into what we do, is Apollon. And what this agreement gives us is we continue our collaboration where it makes logical sense. People have to realize that Apollon is not a manufacturer. Apollon is a research arm, okay? So they develop those type of technologies, like a lot of, and then you got to figure a way to find a commercialization. Now, since I'm working in PureVap, we're a unique future processor of silicon metal of purity between 2N to 4N, much cheaper process and all those type of advantage. I have discussion with industry people, and it was an industry participant that approached us and says, okay, could you do this? And that's how it evolved into it. Now we're much closer to, okay, furnishing our first samples, sending them to them for testing and everything else, which is a normal process as it goes through. If you take a look at what Pyro did for the powders, you do samples, you send them, you get them in, getting in and out and everything else. So this is literally where we are in that sector.
Let me interject there. So there's a couple of things you touched on manufacturers. I want to talk about that. But before we get to that, because that's your validation, at least till now, is your advantage to the rest of the market the fact that you're able to bring the manufacturing costs way down? So in other words, is your porous silicon great quality, but it's right there with the guys who manufacture it where they require 9N to 11N as a raw material? So you've got the same quality product, but is the cost advantage, is it the cost structure that's your advantage because your partnership with Apollon means you can use significantly lower grade silicon in order to create the porous silicon? So, or do you have an advantage on both the product quality and the cost?
We have an advantage on both. It's basically right now, the only processes that exist, okay, are based on using electronic grade silicon metal. Now, if anybody else in the world right now wants to say, oh, okay, I'm going to take that process, going to try it with, metallurgic grade silicon metal, they'll hit a wall, which is Apollon's patent.
Even if they could do it, period.
Yeah, even if they could do it, even if they could do it,
even if they could do it,
it's like anything else. They would have to go through the entire process of doing it and figuring out all the technicalities. So that's one of the. So we leapfrog everybody. I'm going to give you sort of like a funny example. I was approached. When was that? I believe it was December 2018. I was approached.
What?
2018. Okay. I've been working at this for a long time. It's just
yeah. Well, we've been here right with you. I know that.
No, but nobody knows about what I've been doing in batteries. I've only started to talk about it till the end of last year. True. I've learned
last 6
something.
months, basically.
Yeah, I've learned something. These type of process take a bit of time. So, and what that group, that professor wanted to do was basically, his thought was, I'll manufacture porous silicon wafer by using a physical method that's different than etching, but that's what he was aiming to do. Okay, using metallurgic grade silicon metal. So it was a different process to do it, but the aim was to make porous silicon wafer, because the theory is, and it's actually been proven, that if you have a very small porous silicon wafer, the expansion is going to be smaller, anything can work in batteries, and because you can increase the efficiency. So they started on that trail. So that's how I knew a bit about porous silicon wafer. Unfortunately, the university didn't choose me; they chose somebody else. They lost. That's okay. I kept working with others and everything else. And now here I find myself, we're in 2020, okay? I'm working with the guys that own the patent to do porous silicon wafer, and it's going to work. It's the incredible control. Like I wrote in one previous press release, I didn't repeat it in this one, is that you can control the size of the pore, which is the key point of what we're doing this for battery manufacturers, depending on how you play with the raw material, the feedstock, okay? The PureVap's great advantage is that we can play much more than anybody else with our raw material for our end product. We can really control that in our process. So that gives us a unique advantage that we combine that with the technology that Apollon has, and then we're well positioned to start producing porous silicon wafers or porous silicon powders.
And more than just lip service talking about it, because you mentioned the press release, you've got an NDA with a lithium-ion battery manufacturer right now who's looking for porous silicon wafers. I think that's really important for everyone at home to understand that this isn't...
Nobody makes that right now.
This isn't Bernard and the guys cooking up something and hoping to find a market with theories, because we've seen a lot of that in the battery market. We see
George, George, this completely came up of, we were approached by them, okay? And it's their approach that led us to be where we are. The fact is that the battery technologies that works on porous silicon wafers basically uses electronic quality wafers, way expensive. And it's sort of like an overkill, but nobody can do it. Nobody had figured a way to do it with metallurgy. Well, now it's not a question of trying to figure out how to do it. Apollon's already figured out how to do it. They already patented it. Now it's just a question is, these are my operational, this is what I need you guys to do. Can you guys do it? No, we're going to tinkle around, work around it, do everything else. Then we're going to figure, once we figure it out, says, okay, how do we go about producing it? And the beauty is, because of the discussion I've had, it's like the quantity they're looking for isn't something that that's going to be for a big boys as a startup. It's going to be sort of a startup process, but it fits perfectly within the PUREVAP QRR, our pilot plant.
Match made in heaven.
Yes, but it's just one of the parties. Ever since we figured out that batteries is going to be a much more interesting sector than the solar, and it moves into it.
So
like one of the other reason about solar, and I'm going to be very short about this, is basically the manufacturing of the wafers is controlled by China. And even though they just signed a new deal with the US, they still keep the tariffs on solar grade silicon metal. So, and it's not the same costing structure of making porous silicon wafers for batteries than it is for solar. So it's just the timing was good. Very, very good. Yeah, that was the word I was trying to look for. But I knew it was going to fail completely at saying it, so I decided to change word. And our timing is perfect in the sense that, we've been working at this for a long time. We got the pilot plant, but we can also work with what Apollon's doing. We have inventory of material. We don't need our PUREVAP right now product to do everything is really falling into places. And if that, if the deal with the battery manufacturer doesn't work, there's still the powders to do it.
Let me ask you a question. Does the strengthen, because the subject of this press release is you and Apollon strengthen your collaboration to focus on, the porous silicon for the battery market. Does this strengthening in your relationship take you further down the road towards moving your relationship with the battery manufacturer from NDA to something more definitive?
It could.
Does that make it even more likely?
It could, or it could also that, we'll have other people interested in our capacity to produce porous silicon powders, or we'll have other applications. The application for metallurgic grade porous silicon wafers in battery space are massive. Okay. So, there's not too many people doing this. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of research, but not too many people is doing this in a commercial scale. So not too many people are doing it the way we're looking at it, which is we're looking at this basically from the ground going up. So we're looking at this to be competitive in this segment for a very, very long time.
For the first time in this press release, you actually mentioned other market opportunities. Mm-hmm. You just said a minute ago in the press release, you said, quote, massive market opportunities are massive. Mm-hmm. And you highlight outside of batteries naturally. lithium-ion batteries. You mentioned a few: electronics, consumer goods, sensors. Does that mean you might also be going into those markets, or you just or is this matter of fact that lithium-ion battery market is where we're really focusing, but we have these as outlets if we need them?
Okay. Our business plan is to go after high value niche market. Okay. So I'm not looking at big volume, low margin. I'm looking at small volume, higher margin. One of the applications is in the medical field. You make a nano-sized porous silicon wafer. You can include medications into them, inject them in the bloodstream, and lo and behold, the acidity of the blood is enough to basically, at a certain nano size, it's enough to dissolve the silicone, and you just, remove it through urination, and that's it. There's no side effect because it's not a chemical product. It's a natural product. It's sand. Everybody swallowed sand in their life. They don't die about it. You see what I'm saying? It's not a chemical product. There's no chemical process in doing it. So those are one of the applications. The other application I found that was completely far-fetched, but who knows? You have porous silicone wafers, and you can use that with electronics, and you put it in an oil spill and it sucks up the oil. So
say that again. You put it on
an oil spill on an oil, basically
oil spill, a slick, an oil slick.
Yeah, slick and oil spill. It basically sucks it up. University of Toronto research paper on this. So it's like the applications are like mind-numbing. The problem has always been, like any one of those key materials, is that it's the cost of manufacturing.
So how long, end it with this. I know we kind of touched on the question about, when commercial production, demonstrate commercial potential in 2020. Mm-hmm. How long until you think, if you can answer this, and ballpark ETA, we're not looking for a hard deadline or something, but when do you think you'll be able to produce enough quantities of the porous silicon in order to say, hey, battery manufacturers or medicine or oil slick, whatever the case may be, we're ready to start giving you some smaller quantities, higher margins, but something that's meaningful to your income statement?
Okay. You have to look at this in different spots. Okay. You don't start off with, somebody's not going to offer me, like, I'll take an offtake agreement right now, or if they do right now, they'll design it so it's to their advantage or to my disadvantage. So that's not what I'm looking for.
Okay.
What I'm looking at and what I can do right now, what I'm working on doing, is we can produce enough material to attract the interest of end buyers, because we're in a unique position. And then from then on, you start looking at, traditional, how are we going to do this? So, the reality is we will have in 2020 a capacity to produce 50 tons of material.
Wait, so you're talking about you're going to be able to produce 50 tons of porous silicon?
No, George, I'm talking about we're going to be able to produce 50 tons of silicon metal.
Okay.
We'll have the capacity. But what people have to realize is HPQ is uniquely positioned by we're the only public company, okay, that is in this field of silicone for batteries, which is one that's excitement, that's attracting a lot of interest and everything else. And we're one of the most advanced in that regard with everything that we have working with. We have patented process that Apollon's developed. We have our process. We have our own technologies and everything else. So, in the battery space, if you want to look at the silicone, and as we said in our press release, silicone is a much better material than graphite, bare none. So, so we're talking about replacing graphite with silicone. We're talking about multiple applications for silicone, high-end niche market. And we're at the beginning of the excitement of that field. And we're the only public company doing this. That's
your double-edged sword there too, because everyone knows about lithium, that's for sure, because the last 3 years.
But everybody in the mama's a lithium company, okay?
Yeah, and then everyone knows about graphite. Right?
Everybody's in graphite. See,
and you're the lone wolf in silicon, but one thing I can tell everyone at home is,
George,
one thing for sure is when I do
no, George, we are the lone public wolf.
Yes, that's what I was about to say.
We're the lone public wolf. There is millions and millions of dollars invested in this for people trying to catch up to where we are.
And that's the point I want to make, just to finish it, is that when I do my reading, it's not as if HPQ is chasing silicon and they're a lone wolf and they're off walking out in the forest by themselves somewhere. On the private side, there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of discussion about silicon. We just don't have any public, certainly not small cap, but any public companies that are focusing on silicon. So to your point, if people do their research and see that silicon is a holy grail, then HPQ is the only vehicle they have.
Yes, and it's going to become more and more and more known. It's going to be more and more understood. And 2020 is the year when we'll be starting to produce materials for potential end buyers. So it's a very exciting year. We're very well positioned. We represent a great value, and we have another advantage because you keep mentioning about lithium and graphite and everybody else. I think we explained that in the previous press release. One of the things that differentiates us is our technologies is not dependent on the mine, and which saves us a $300 to $400 million capex to do. And because it's smaller and we're looking at high value markets, we don't really need to take those disadvantages offtake agreement that everybody ends up doing, and then you end up having to renegotiate as you get closer to production.
Right, because you give it away because you're just hoping to get an offtake agreement, low price, because some end user knows that you need an offtake agreement to get financing for your $400 or $500 million mine.
Exactly.
You're not constrained by that at all, because silicon is manufactured from quartz, which you can get from anywhere.
Yep,
including your own properties that a lot of people don't know or even forget.
It's not a big issue for us right now. Quartz is not a big issue. So I think it's going to be a fun year. Finally, it's been 2 years of watching the paint dry, but it's like everything comes in at the right time. Everything really comes in at the right time with the right technologies and the right process. Silicon for batteries. And some people ask us, how are you going to go out and market this? You don't really have a team. Well, you got to remember that in the nano-powder side, okay, I'm a partner up with Pyro. They've invented
PyroGenesis
PyroGenesis. PyroGenesis. And they've done a lot of work on selling metal powders for 3D printers. Not the same thing, but it's almost the same thing. So there's a lot of synergy. There's a lot of synergies with all the people I've sort of worked with.
Yeah, they've produced high-end metal powders for other applications, true, but that clearly means they have that ability. So yeah, that's why they're at the table. That's why you've gone so far. And Bernard, looking forward to seeing what you're going to be doing. I'd like to say for the rest of the year, but it's only January. We had you on twice. So something tells me that this is.
And some people say that I don't issue a lot of press releases.
Just from the frequency, it seems like there's more and more to come. So this is the year, and I'm really looking forward to it. And thanks for being on here.
All right, you're welcome.
You've been watching, and if you're not watching, maybe you're listening on our podcast stations. You can find us on Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, because we love you can tune into video, but if you can't, listen while you're in your car, waiting in your doctor's appointment, on the subway, whatever the case may be. You can listen to the podcast. But you've been watching and listening to Bernard Tourion, HPQ Silicon, trades on the TSX Venture under the stock symbol HPQ. Do your due diligence. You've heard all the information. It's becoming pretty hard to ignore at this point. Do your due diligence. Use Agoracom. Get over the company site, and then come back to Agoracom, where you got that great CO verified form. A lot of action there. We've even got French investors. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Who are coming in there, asking questions in French and communicating with Bernard. So come join that community, get your answers to your questions, and maybe you've discovered your next great small cap company for the future. Have a great day, everyone. Talk to you soon.